A simple pawn pushed by a 12-year-old girl was all it took to obliterate a Wall Street billionaire's empire. Win this chess game, and I will give you $200 million. But if you lose, your mother is fired immediately, Vincent Caldwell sneered. The ruthless titan glared down at Diana, a terrified cleaner weeping on the VIP room floor. He thought he was crushing a helpless servant, ignoring her daughter Audrey standing quietly in the shadows. Though dressed in faded clothes, the girl possessed eyes, holding the cold weight of a seasoned grandmaster. As surrounding elites chuckled, Audrey stepped into the harsh chandelier light. She walked straight to the antique chessboard, looking dead into the billionaire's eyes. "I accept your wager," she said, her voice slicing through the heavy silence. The entire room froze in utter disbelief. "Before we see how this child destroys a giant, I would love to know what time it is and what city you are watching from right now. Drop a comment below so I can see how far this story has traveled. If you want to make sure we cross paths, again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. Just 20 minutes before the impossible wager paralyzed the VIP room, the air inside the Obsidian Club was already suffocating under the weight of Wall Street's ruthless elite. Vincent Caldwell, a predatory venture capitalist known for gutting vulnerable tech startups, aggressively slammed his phone onto a mahogany side table. A massive plunge in his heavily leveraged tech portfolio had just evaporated $30 million from his net worth in a single trading hour. His jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth, and his sharp, icy gaze dared anyone to cross his path. Enter Diana Hayes. She was a tired, unassuming cleaner working the graveyard shift to keep her small family afloat. Her manager, terrified of the investor's foul mood, had roughly shoved a silver tray of fresh crystal glasses into her trembling hands, ordering her to service the high-stakes tables. Approaching the furious tycoon felt like walking into a lion's den. Her worn, calloused fingers shook violently as she reached across the velvet-lined table to clear an empty tumbler. The sudden explosive curse from Vincent over another dropping ticker symbol made her flinch. It was a microscopic jerk of her wrist, but the consequence was catastrophic. A full glass of vintage Bordeaux toppled over, sending a dark crimson wave splashing directly across the lapel of his $10,000 bespoke silk suit. The billionaire sprang to his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the polished marble floor. A terrifying silence instantly devoured the room, halting the clatter of poker chips and hushed financial murmurs. "You incompetent, worthless rat!" Vincent roared, his voice dripping with absolute venom. He grabbed a linen napkin, fiercely dabbing at the ruined fabric, while glaring down at the frightened woman who had immediately dropped to her knees. Diana frantically apologized, tears streaming down her pale cheeks as she tried to help wipe the stain. He violently slapped her hand away. "Do not touch me with your filthy hands. You think your miserable life could ever repay this damage? You are fired. Get out of my sight before I have my security throw you in a cell for property destruction." The sheer cruelty of his tirade echoed against the soundproofed walls, a brutal display of unchecked power. From a plush leather armchair a few feet away, Nathaniel Roth watched the grotesque spectacle unfold. As a rival magnate who despised Caldwell's reckless market manipulations, Roth merely took a slow sip of his bourbon, his calculating eyes analyzing the outburst without offering a single word of intervention. Out in the opulent marble corridor, 12-year-old Audrey Hayes had been sitting patiently on a velvet bench, waiting for her mother's shift to end. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar, allowing the vicious shouts and familiar desperate sobbing to drift outside. The young girl did not panic or cry. Instead, she slowly closed the advanced calculus textbook resting on her lap, sliding it into her faded backpack. She pushed open the solid brass-handled doors and stepped into the oppressive den of wolves. Ignoring the sneers of the wealthy patrons, she navigated the sea of expensive tailoring and intoxicating perfumes until she stood directly beside her weeping mother. Audrey gently placed her small hand on Diana's shaking shoulder, pulling her upright with surprising strength. The girl then slowly raised her chin, locking her ancient gaze directly onto the towering, furious tycoon, setting the stage for an unprecedented confrontation. She refused to let this arrogant monster shatter the only family she had left. Her grandfather had taught her better than to cower before baseless authority. The heavy silence of the room was shattered only by the scraping of a heavy velvet chair as the 12-year-old girl sat across from the towering billionaire. The centerpiece separating them was an exquisite antique chessboard carved from flawless obsidian and rare milky jade resting upon a polished mahogany table. It was a museum-quality artifact, a brutal battlefield designed strictly for the masters of the universe, now hosting a child wearing scuffed canvas sneakers and a faded denim jacket. Surrounding this surreal scene, the circle of wealthy patrons tightened like a pack of wolves, their initial shock rapidly shifting into condescending amusement. Hushed murmurs rippled through the dense crowd of bespoke Italian suits and diamond-draped socialites. They exchanged mocking glances while sipping expensive champagne, blatantly whispering about the sheer absurdity of a lowly cleaner's daughter daring to challenge an apex predator on his own guarded territory. A few ruthless executives even placed cruel side wagers worth more money than Diana could realistically earn in 10 lifetimes, casually betting on exactly how many seconds it would take for the trembling girl to break down crying and surrender. Standing paralyzed near the towering brass-handled doorway, Diana clutched her soiled cleaning apron with white-knuckled desperation, silently praying for an impossible miracle to save them from ruin. Ignoring the pathetic display of maternal terror, Vincent smirked his monstrous arrogance, fully restored, as he settled comfortably into his seat. Reaching out with a heavy gold-ringed hand, he aggressively advanced his white kingside pawn 2 squares forward, initiating the high-stakes match with a sharp and offensive opening strike. He approached the ancient game exactly how he ruthlessly orchestrated hostile corporate takeovers on Wall Street, utilizing overwhelming brute force, blistering speed, and absolute mercilessness to crush any resistance. Within mere minutes of rapid play, the tycoon aggressively deployed his ivory knights and bishops, flooding the center of the gleaming jade board to violently choke off any potential breathing room. His signature strategy was meticulously designed to paralyze weaker opponents, aiming to quickly manufacture a suffocating atmosphere of inescapable doom that forced terrified victims into making fatal tactical errors out of pure panic. Several wealthy onlookers nodded in quiet approval, easily recognizing the exact Caldwell maneuver that had successfully bankrupted countless rival tech firms over the past decade. He fully intended to humiliate the 12-year-old interloper, immediately eager to definitively prove that the established natural order of the elite world could never be disrupted by the misplaced bravery of the working class. Yet, despite the terrifying pressure bearing down upon her small shoulders, Audrey absolutely did not tremble or flinch. Her delicate fingers moved with deliberate, practiced grace across the polished stone surface. Controlling the black obsidian pieces, she absorbed his furious assault by establishing a deeply calculated, mathematically impenetrable defense. Instead of foolishly reacting to his aggressive provocations or attempting a risky counterattack, she meticulously built an intricate fortress around her vulnerable king, weaving her humble pawns into a solid barricade. As the cigar-scented tension further thickened the ambient air, her brilliant mind quieted the surrounding noise, instinctively retreating to the peaceful front porch of a modest Brooklyn home many years ago. She vividly recalled the warm, calloused hands of her late grandfather, Walter Hayes, gently guiding her tiny fingers over a terribly worn wooden board during long summer afternoons. His soothing voice echoed perfectly in her sharp memory, constantly reminding her that the most dangerous piece on any board is rarely the one making the loudest noise. The wise old man had taught her the sacred patience of the ultimate underdog, carefully explaining that genuine survival often required letting an arrogant opponent recklessly overextend their valuable resources until their own unchecked aggression transformed into their single greatest weakness. Anchored deeply by that profound ancestral wisdom, the young girl simply observed the raging billionaire systematically waste his early momentum against her flawless structural wall, her calm expression remaining as still and utterly unreadable as a frozen winter lake. The clacking of jade pieces echoed like gunshots as the game entered a brutal, breathless mid-phase. Vincent found himself unexpectedly stymied by the impenetrable fortress the child had meticulously constructed. His trademark aggressive opening had completely dissolved against her quiet patience. Frustration boiled beneath his tailored exterior because a Wall Street titan simply did not lose to a 12-year-old girl. Realizing that sheer tactical force was failing, he seamlessly transitioned into his most effective corporate weapon, which was psychological warfare. He leaned menacingly across the mahogany table, invading her personal space to deliver a steady stream of calculated venom. His voice dropped to a sinister whisper, designed to slice through her concentration. He mocked the pathetic reality of her existence, vividly detailing how her mother spent every waking hour scrubbing the filthy floors of men like him just to afford cheap groceries. He painted a bleak picture of their inevitable future, promising that after tonight, they would be thrown out into the unforgiving streets with absolutely nothing. While delivering this psychological poison, his large hands moved with lethal precision across the obsidian surface. He violently slammed his ivory knight onto a crucial central square, establishing a dominant outpost that paralyzed the black defenses. Almost immediately afterward, he slid his powerful rook down the open file, creating an inescapable net of intersecting attacks. This masterfully coordinated maneuver violently pinned Audrey's vulnerable king deep into a suffocating corner of the board. The trap appeared mathematically flawless, severing every conceivable escape route and signaling absolute destruction. Standing helplessly nearby, Diana recognized the undeniable shape of defeat forming on the stone battlefield. The terrified mother gasped, burying her tear-stained face into her trembling hands, utterly consumed by the horrifying prospect of immediate unemployment and total destitution. She could already feel the crushing weight of eviction and poverty swallowing them whole. Yet amidst this terrifying display of dominance and despair, Audrey completely defied expectations. Instead of dropping her gaze to the board in a panic or succumbing to the emotional manipulation, she slowly lifted her head. She completely ignored the trapped Black King and instead locked her piercing eyes directly onto Vincent's face. The young girl stared into his soul with a chilling intensity that felt entirely unnatural for a child. She utilized the profound silence to her advantage, carefully dissecting the physical tells of her arrogant opponent. She tracked the rapid, shallow rhythm of his breathing, noted the slight flare of his nostrils, and analyzed the smug, self-satisfied twitch at the corner of his lips. These were the unmistakable biological markers of a predator who prematurely believed the hunt was over. By refusing to look at the board, she silently communicated that his elaborate trap meant absolutely nothing to her. Her unwavering spirit formed a titanium shield against his toxic words, proving that true strength originated from within rather than from a bank account. Vincent expected tears begging, or at least a visible tremor of fear, but he received nothing except a cold, calculated stare that slowly began to reflect his own hidden insecurities back at him. Her profound stillness transformed the opulent VIP room into a vacuum, neutralizing his aggressive energy and rendering his cruel insults entirely powerless. She recognized that his desperate need to verbally belittle a child exposed a fundamental weakness in his character, a fragile ego terrified of unexpected resistance. Audrey mentally processed the positioning of the jade pieces without needing to physically look down, relying entirely on her photographic memory and the spatial awareness her grandfather had rigorously trained into her mind. She knew exactly where the ivory knight sat and how the rook commanded the open file, but she also saw the hidden geometries that his blinding arrogance prevented him from noticing. The surrounding billionaires held their collective breath, anticipating the imminent collapse of the fragile girl. The ambient noise completely vanished, replaced entirely by the oppressive tension radiating from the antique table. Vincent shifted slightly in his heavy velvet chair, his confident smirk faltering for a microscopic fraction of a second under her relentless scrutiny. The psychological torment he usually utilized to break seasoned executives was inexplicably bouncing off the iron will of a 12-year-old. A suffocating tension gripped the onlookers as Vincent deliberately pushed his most powerful piece directly into the line of fire. The pristine ivory queen glided across the polished mahogany table and landed forcefully on a vulnerable central square with a resounding click that echoed through the opulent VIP room. It was an incredibly audacious queen sacrifice deliberately designed to be the ultimate display of absolute supremacy. By offering his most valuable asset as bait, the predatory investor was publicly orchestrating a spectacular humiliation rather than simply trying to win a chess match. The surrounding socialites and corporate sharks leaned in closer, their eyes wide with morbid fascination as they recognized the sheer brutality of the maneuver. If the Black King or any defending piece captured the offered royal, the resulting geometric shift would instantly open a fatal attacking corridor for the white bishops and knights, leading to an unavoidable forced checkmate within precisely 2 subsequent moves. The trap was meticulously constructed to resemble a generous gift while secretly harboring absolute destruction. Watching intently from the comfort of his leather armchair, Nathaniel Roth slowly lowered his crystal glass of bourbon, his sharp features tightening into a deep frown. The seasoned magnate instantly recognized the profound cruelty embedded within this specific tactical configuration because he had witnessed the exact same strategy utilized during ruthless corporate acquisitions. Caldwell always operated by presenting a desperate rival with an impossibly lucrative financial bailout, only to weaponize the fine print and legally obliterate their entire infrastructure the moment they accepted the poisoned chalice. Applying such vicious psychological warfare against a weary cleaner's daughter disgusted Roth. Yet he remained absolutely silent, captivated by the raw mechanics of the impending execution. The ambient murmurs of the elite crowd completely died down, replaced by a heavy expectant silence as everyone waited for the impending emotional collapse of the young challenger. For the first time since the grueling match began, Audrey hesitated. Her small hand hovered uncertainly above the obsidian defenders, her brow furrowing slightly in deep concentration. Interpreting this brief pause as total surrender, Vincent leaned back against the plush velvet upholstery and interlaced his fingers over his chest, projecting an aura of invincible triumph. He genuinely believed he had finally shattered her unnatural composure and mentally broke her down to the level of her terrified mother. He offered a condescending smirk, silently relishing the agonizing moment before the final blow was struck. However, behind those calm and calculating eyes, the 12-year-old was not experiencing fear, but rather engaging in a hyper-accelerated process of complex spatial analysis. She mentally mapped out every conceivable variation resulting from the poisoned offering, tracing the invisible lines of force crisscrossing the antique jade board. She clearly saw the blatant two-move checkmate waiting patiently in the shadows, acknowledging the undeniable brilliance of the aggressive bait. Yet as her vision expanded beyond the immediate danger zone, a profound realization materialized within her brilliant mind. By committing his absolute best resources to this flashy, overwhelming assault, the arrogant capitalist had fundamentally violated a core principle her late grandfather had constantly emphasized during their countless practice sessions. The wise old man had always warned that unbridled aggression frequently creates a dangerous tunnel vision, causing overly confident players to completely abandon their foundational defenses. Audrey meticulously traced the trajectory of the remaining ivory forces and discovered a catastrophic structural void left behind in the wake of the glorious queen sacrifice. The White King, previously shielded by a formidable wall of protective pieces, was now sitting completely exposed along the neglected back rank. The elaborate trap was indeed lethal, but it contained a singular, microscopic flaw born entirely of blinding hubris. If she could absorb the initial shockwave and navigate the immediate threat, the path to a devastating counterattack lay wide open. Embracing the profound courage taught by her ancestors, Audrey made a terrifyingly bold decision that completely defied conventional logic. She extended her arm with unwavering certainty, her fingers firmly grasping the heavy obsidian piece. In a fluid, deliberate motion that sent an invisible shockwave through the gathered elite, she mercilessly captured the ivory queen and removed it entirely from the battlefield. Vincent's victorious smirk froze into a grotesque mask of horror as a tiny pawn slipped past his defensive line. He had been so entirely consumed by his own brilliant aggression, relentlessly hunting the trapped black monarch, that he suffered from fatal tunnel vision. His hyperfixation on the center of the mahogany table blinded him to the quiet, methodical journey occurring along the far edge of the battlefield. Over the course of the last dozen exchanges, while the billionaire sacrificed his heavy artillery to force an opening, Audrey had subtly advanced a humble foot soldier, step by silent step. That remarkably insignificant piece of dark stone, previously dismissed as mere collateral damage, now confidently arrived at the 8th rank directly behind the enemy fortifications. The young girl did not flinch or celebrate her monumental achievement. Instead, she extended her delicate hand toward the collection of captured pieces resting on the velvet perimeter and retrieved a fallen obsidian queen. Placing the resurrected monarch firmly onto the final square, the structural reality of the board instantaneously transformed. The newly crowned royal immediately formed a lethal alignment with a deeply hidden black bishop that Vincent had completely forgotten about. These intersecting diagonals of absolute power sliced straight through the abandoned white defenses, creating an inescapable crossfire. Audrey withdrew her hand, interlocking her fingers softly in her lap, and locked her ancient blue eyes onto the towering tycoon. "Checkmate, sir," she stated, her steady voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a sharpened scalpel. The immediate aftermath was defined by a profound, suffocating silence that swallowed the opulent VIP room whole. The ambient clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased entirely, leaving only the sound of shallow, nervous breathing, The condescending chuckles and cruel side wagers exchanged by the surrounding corporate sharks evaporated into thin air. Every single wealthy patron simply stared at the antique jade chessboard in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Sitting nearby, Nathaniel Roth watched the pathetic meltdown of his greatest rival, feeling a chilling mixture of awe and disgust at the unfolding spectacle. The sheer mathematical impossibility of the situation slowly fractured Vincent's colossal ego into jagged, irredeemable pieces. The pristine white king was trapped permanently paralyzed by a 12-year-old child wearing a faded denim jacket. The blood rapidly drained from his meticulously groomed face, leaving behind a sickening ashen pallor. Cold sweat gathered rapidly along his brow as his chest heaved violently under his expensive silk suit. His brilliant mind furiously recalculated the board, desperately searching for a hidden escape route, a loophole, or a technicality to exploit. But the ruthless geometry remained completely unforgiving. The devastating reality of his total public defeat finally bypassed his denial, triggering a primal explosive rage. He violently slammed his heavy fists down onto the polished mahogany surface, causing the precious jade and obsidian pieces to wildly jump and scatter across the grid. No, he roared, the sheer volume of his booming voice rattling the nearby crystal decanters. He sprang from his seat, kicking the heavy velvet chair backward until it crashed onto the marble floor. This is absolute garbage, an impossible setup. The predatory investor frantically pointed a shaking manic finger directly at the calm child sitting opposite him. He completely abandoned any remaining shred of his refined, aristocratic facade, transforming instantly into a desperate cornered animal. He demanded that the club security immediately confiscate the board and review the surveillance tapes frantically, trying to rewrite the devastating history of the last hour. You are nothing but a filthy little cheat. You manipulated the pieces while I was distracted. He screamed, his venomous accusations echoing wildly off the soundproofed walls. There is absolutely no way a miserable, uneducated street rat could ever outmaneuver me. I will never pay you $200 million. You will not see a single dime of my money. You miserable fraud. I will ruin you and your wretched mother for attempting to extort me. Nobody dared to breathe when the name Walter Hayes suddenly pierced the heavy air of the penthouse. Audrey remained seated with absolute stillness while the enraged billionaire towered over her, throwing wild accusations of cheating. She did not shrink away from his manic finger or the spittle flying from his trembling lips. I did not manipulate any pieces, sir, she replied smoothly, with a chillingly even tone that contrasted sharply against his feral screaming. I simply watched your hands because you play this ancient game exactly how you conduct your corporate acquisitions. You constantly use aggressive forward movements to completely distract your opponents while subtly repositioning your vulnerable assets into hidden corners. You rely entirely on psychological misdirection and fabricated threats to force a premature surrender before anyone notices the massive structural deficits hiding behind your front line. The 12-year-old girl slowly stood up to face her furious adversary, directly, her ancient blue eyes piercing right through his collapsing facade. That is precisely the identical fraudulent tactic you utilized 10 years ago to steal a small community coffee roasting factory in Brooklyn from my grandfather. You systematically fabricated his operational liability reports, artificially inflated his debt obligations through phantom offshore shell companies, and deliberately choked local supply chain logistics to force an artificial bankruptcy. Vincent visibly flinched, as if physically struck by an invisible bullet. The vibrant crimson color, born of his recent fury, instantly drained from his cheeks, replaced by a sickening chalky whiteness. Audrey continued her relentless verbal dismantling without showing a single ounce of mercy or hesitation. You stole a proud family legacy, using forged financial documents, because you were too inherently weak to build anything genuine yourself. Your entire empire is a pathetic illusion built on stolen equity and continuous deception. Across the silent room, Nathaniel Roth abruptly sat forward in his plush leather armchair. The rival magnate possessed a notoriously sharp memory for numerical data and complex corporate structuring. Hearing the specific methodology involving artificially inflated liability metrics through offshore holding entities triggered a massive alarm bell within his brilliant mind. He mentally cross-referenced the meticulous details the young girl had just exposed regarding the stolen coffee business with the highly confidential audit reports sitting currently on his own office desk. Caldwell was presently attempting to finalize a massive joint venture with Roth Industries using those exact same convoluted valuation frameworks. The sickening realization hit the seasoned investor like a runaway freight train. Vincent was actively attempting to execute the very same fraudulent asset concealment scheme on him right now. The supposed financial strength underpinning Caldwell's entire investment portfolio was nothing more than a carefully constructed house of cards built entirely upon forged ledgers. The oppressive silence of the elite club was suddenly broken by the harsh grinding sound of a heavy crystal ashtray. Roth slowly stood up from his seat while deliberately crushing the glowing cherry of his imported Cuban cigar into the glass. His calculating gaze shifted from the ruined game on the table toward the trembling pale figure of his corporate adversary. The sheer contempt radiating from Roth was palpable enough to freeze boiling water. He did not utter a single word to the exposed fraudster standing pathetically before him. Instead, the towering tycoon calmly reached inside the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and retrieved a sleek satellite smartphone. He bypassed his usual network of private lawyers and corporate fixers, choosing instead to swiftly dial a direct emergency contact number for the regional director of the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission. As the line began to ring audibly in the quiet room, Vincent stumbled backward into a decorative pillar, his breathing turning into shallow, frantic gasps as his doom materialized. The seismic shockwave that started at the antique jade chessboard violently crashed into the opening bell of Wall Street the very next morning. Before trading could officially commence, federal agents stormed the sleek glass headquarters of Caldwell Investments, clutching stacks of federal warrants. Acting swiftly on the undeniable evidence corroborated by multiple anonymous insiders following the previous night's disastrous club incident, authorities immediately froze every single domestic and offshore corporate account linked to the disgraced tycoon. The corresponding market reaction proved absolutely merciless, as terrified shareholders dumped their toxic holdings, causing the company's stock to plummet 90% within minutes. Facing a mountain of irrefutable perjury and wire fraud charges, the once untouchable predator found himself utterly ruined and facing decades inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. Meanwhile, a highly specialized legal team dispatched by Nathaniel Roth moved with surgical precision to enforce the parameters of the high-stakes wager. Because the public challenge had been witnessed by numerous high-profile individuals and subsequently recorded on the private club's internal security systems, the binding verbal contract remained legally enforceable. Through relentless litigation and airtight escrow maneuvers, the attorneys successfully extracted the promised $200 million from Vincent's untainted personal reserves right before the overarching government seizures took full effect. Armed with their newfound monumental wealth, Diana and Audrey permanently severed all ties with the suffocating toxicity of the billionaire lifestyle. They relocated immediately to Brooklyn, where they purchased the exact commercial plot that had been stolen from Walter Hayes a decade prior. Working alongside local architects, the mother and daughter dedicated themselves tirelessly to rebuilding the beloved community coffee roasting factory from the ground up, restoring a stolen family legacy while creating hundreds of honest jobs. Standing proudly before the newly constructed brick facade, smelling the rich aroma of freshly roasted beans drifting through the neighborhood, the 12-year-old girl reflected on their incredible journey from that dark room to this bright morning. She turned toward her mother with a serene smile illuminating her face and delivered a profound final thought for anyone facing insurmountable odds in life. True power never comes from how loudly you can threaten others or how much money you hoard to hide your insecurities, Audrey stated quietly. Real victory happens when you stay perfectly patient and simply let the blind arrogance of greedy giants build the exact traps that will eventually destroy them completely.